The thunder of hooves echoed across the prairie as Prudence Walker raced beneath the blood-orange sunset, her golden hair streaming behind her like a banner of defiance. She rode as if the devil himself was on her heels, and in some ways he was. 3 days on the run had left dark circles beneath her eyes, her once fine riding dress torn and muddied, but the fierce determination in her gaze never wavered. Hadley Reeves watched the approaching rider from the porch of his modest cabin, tucked away in a hidden valley of the Wyoming territory. The year was 1878, and in these parts strangers rarely brought good news. His weathered hand instinctively moved to rest on the Colt revolver at his hip as he observed the woman's desperate pace. When Prudence spotted the cabin, she slowed her exhausted mare, approaching with caution. The sight of the tall, broad-shouldered man standing on the porch made her hesitate. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out the strong line of his jaw, now tensed in wariness. "State your business, madam," he called out, his voice deep and steady. Prudence reined her horse to a stop, keeping a safe distance. "I need water for my horse and directions to the nearest town," she replied, trying to keep her voice from betraying her fear. Hadley stepped off the porch, his boots crunching on the dry earth as he approached. He was close enough now to see the dried blood on her sleeve and the unmistakable look of a hunted animal in her eyes. "Your horse needs more than water. She needs rest," he observed. "And by the looks of it, so do you." Prudence stiffened. "I can't stay. I need to keep moving." "Moving from what?" Hadley asked, his keen eyes noting how she constantly glanced over her shoulder. For a long moment, she said nothing, weighing her options. Then, meeting his gaze directly for the first time, she made a decision. "They'll hunt me," she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. The cowboy's expression hardened, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. "Then let them meet me first." Prudence was taken aback by the conviction in his voice. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Hadley replied, extending a hand to help her down from her horse. "I know when someone's in trouble, and I know I don't take kindly to hunters on my land." Reluctantly, Prudence accepted his help, wincing as her boots hit the ground. Days in the saddle had left her muscles screaming in protest. "I'm Hadley Reeves," he said, still holding her hand. "And this is my land you're standing on." "Prudence Walker," she replied, withdrawing her hand quickly. "And I won't bring trouble to your door, Mr. Reeves. I just need—" "You need food, rest, and someone to look at that wound," he interrupted, nodding toward her arm. "The nearest town is Cottonwood Creek, a day's ride west. But whatever's chasing you will look there first." Prudence glanced around at the secluded cabin, tucked away in its protective valley. "Why would you help me?" Hadley took the reins of her horse, leading the exhausted animal toward a small stable behind his cabin. "Out here we don't ask too many questions, Miss Walker, but we do help folks in need." Inside the cabin, the warmth of a dying fire greeted them. The space was simple but clean: a wooden table with 2 chairs, a small cooking area, and a narrow bed in the corner. Books lined a crude shelf along one wall, surprising Prudence. "Sit," Hadley instructed, gesturing to one of the chairs. He moved to stoke the fire before retrieving a metal box from beneath his bed. "Let me see that arm." "It's nothing," Prudence protested, but found herself sinking into the chair nonetheless. The mere thought of sitting somewhere safe, even for a moment, was overwhelming. Hadley returned with the box, which contained basic medical supplies. "Nothing doesn't bleed like that," he said, gently pushing up her sleeve to reveal a long gash. "Bullet graze." Her silence was answer enough. As Hadley cleaned and wrapped her wound, Prudence studied him. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His hands, though calloused from hard work, were surprisingly gentle. "You're not just a rancher," she observed, noticing the precision with which he tended her injury. A shadow passed across his face. "I was a field surgeon during the war. Saw more than my share of wounds like this." "The war's been over for 13 years, Prudence noted. "Some wars never truly end, Miss Walker." Hadley secured the bandage. "Now, tell me who's hunting you." Prudence hesitated, the weight of her secret heavy on her shoulders. "Men who work for Victor Caldwell." Hadley's expression darkened instantly. "The railroad man?" She nodded. "He's my former employer. I was his secretary in Chicago." "Long way from Chicago," Hadley remarked, moving to put a pot of coffee on the stove. "I came west with him and his associates when they were surveying for the new rail line," Prudence explained. "That's when I discovered what they were really doing." "And what's that?" Prudence reached into her bodice and withdrew a folded document. "They're swindling the government and the settlers. The land they're buying for the railroad, they're purchasing it using false claims, bribing officials, and then selling portions to their friends before the government pays them 10 times what they paid." Hadley's eyes narrowed. "That's a serious accusation." "It's true. I kept Mr. Caldwell's books. I saw the real numbers," she said, unfolding the document. "And then I found a map showing where they've buried the bodies of those who stood in their way." Hadley examined the map, his expression grim. "And they know you have this?" "They know I took something. I don't think they know exactly what." Prudence's hands trembled slightly. "I was planning to take it to the federal marshal in Cheyenne." "Cheyenne's a 4-day ride," Hadley said, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. "And Caldwell has men everywhere." "That's why I can't stay," Prudence insisted, accepting the cup gratefully. "I've put you in danger just by being here." Hadley sat across from her, his gaze steady. "Miss Walker, I've been in danger since the day I was born. One more threat won't make much difference." "You don't understand," she argued. "Victor Caldwell is a powerful man. He has gunmen, lawyers, and half the territory officials in his pocket. And you're just one woman with a piece of paper," Hadley acknowledged. "But sometimes that's all it takes to bring down giants." Prudence studied him over the rim of her cup. "Why are you really helping me, Mr. Reeves?" Hadley was silent for a long moment. "I came west after the war to escape men like Caldwell, men who profit from death and misery. I built this place with my own hands, away from their kind of civilization." He met her gaze. "But it seems their brand of corruption follows wherever men go." They sat in silence as darkness fell completely outside. The wind picked up, whistling through the cracks in the cabin walls. "You should rest," Hadley finally said, standing. "Take the bed. I'll keep watch." Prudence wanted to argue but found she couldn't. Exhaustion pulled at her like quicksand. "Just for a few hours," she conceded. "We need to move before dawn." "We?" Hadley raised an eyebrow. "I assumed you meant." Prudence faltered. A small smile touched his lips. "I did. Get some rest, Miss Walker. Tomorrow will be soon enough to plan our next move." Prudence awoke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a disorienting moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back, and she sat up quickly, wincing at the pain in her arm. Hadley stood at the small cast-iron stove, his back to her. Outside, the first light of dawn was just beginning to soften the night sky. "You slept deeply," he remarked without turning around. "No nightmares this time." Prudence flushed, realizing she must have cried out in her sleep. "I'm sorry if I disturbed you." Hadley shook his head, bringing a plate of food to the table. "No need for apologies. Nightmares are familiar companions out here." As they ate, Hadley laid out his plan. There's an old trapper's cabin about 15 miles north of here. It's well hidden and few know about it. We'll go there first, lay low for a day or two, then make for Cheyenne using the back trails." "You've given this some thought," Prudence observed. "I don't sleep much," he replied simply. After breakfast, they prepared to leave. Hadley packed supplies into saddlebags while Prudence studied the map she'd stolen, committing the details to memory before carefully folding it away. "Take this," Hadley said, offering her a Winchester rifle. "Do you know how to use it?" Prudence took the weapon with practiced ease. "My father taught me, before he died." Hadley nodded approvingly. "Good. We'll need every advantage." They were about to mount their horses when the distant sound of hoofbeats made them both freeze. Hadley motioned for Prudence to get back inside the cabin while he moved to the edge of the clearing, peering through the early morning mist. "For riders," he reported when he returned. "Coming fast from the east." Prudence's face paled. "They've found me." "How?" "Questions for later," Hadley said grimly, checking his revolver. "Is there anything else in that document they might want besides the map?" "The ledger shows payments to officials, including the territorial governor," Prudence explained quickly. "It's evidence of corruption at the highest levels." Hadley's expression hardened. No wonder they want it back. The riders were closer now, close enough that Prudence could make out the silhouette of a man she recognized: Jackson, Caldwell's chief enforcer. Her blood ran cold. "We can't outrun them," Hadley said, assessing their options. "Not with them this close." "Then what do we do?" Prudence asked, clutching the Winchester. Hadley's eyes met hers. "We make a stand." Before Prudence could respond, Hadley was moving, positioning himself behind a stack of firewood with a clear view of the approaching riders. He signaled for Prudence to take cover at the corner of the cabin. The four men slowed as they approached, spreading out in a line before the cabin. The leader, Jackson, was a tall man with a pockmarked face and cold eyes. He surveyed the property with the calculated gaze of a predator. "Hello, the cabin," Jackson called out. "We're looking for a woman who passed this way. Railroad business." Hadley stood, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. "No women here, gentlemen. Just me and my horses." Jackson's eyes narrowed. "Mind if we look around?" "She's stolen property belonging to the Western Continental Railroad." "I mind very much," Hadley replied evenly. "This is private property." One of the other men spat on the ground. "Ain't no such thing as private property when the railroad wants it, mister." "That right?" Hadley's hand hovered near his revolver. "Law says differently." Jackson laughed, a harsh sound with no humor. "Law's what men with guns say it is out here." His eyes scanned the cabin. "We know she came this way. Tracked her horse's prints right to your door." "Lots of horses pass through these parts," Hadley countered. "Not with a distinctive shoe pattern like that one." Jackson nodded toward Prudence's mare in the corral. "Now, you can make this easy and tell us where she is, or we can burn this place to the ground and search the ashes." Prudence tensed, preparing to reveal herself rather than let Hadley's home be destroyed. But before she could move, a shot rang out. Jackson's hat flew off his head, and he reeled in his saddle. "Next one goes between your eyes," Hadley said calmly, his revolver trained on Jackson. "Turn around and ride out." Instead of complying, Jackson signaled to his men, who immediately drew their weapons. What followed was a chaotic exchange of gunfire. Prudence fired the Winchester, forcing two of the men to dive from their horses for cover. Hadley's precise shooting struck one man in the shoulder, sending him sprawling in the dirt. Jackson and the remaining gunmen retreated behind a rocky outcropping at the edge of the clearing, continuing to fire at the cabin. A bullet splintered the wood near Prudence's head, showering her with fragments. "We need to move," Hadley called to her, laying down covering fire as he backed toward the stable. "They'll have more men coming." Prudence made a dash for the horses, narrowly avoiding a bullet that kicked up dirt at her heels. Hadley was right behind her, firing steadily to keep Jackson and his man pinned down. They mounted quickly, Hadley leading them toward a narrow trail that wound up into the foothills behind his cabin. Bullets whined past them as they urged their horses to a gallop, not slowing until the sounds of pursuit had faded behind them. When they finally stopped to rest the horses in a secluded grove of pine trees, Prudence turned to Hadley, her eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry about your home," she said softly. Hadley shrugged, though there was a tightness around his eyes. "It's just wood and stone. Can be rebuilt." "Why did you do it?" Prudence asked. "You could have given me up, saved yourself the trouble." Hadley checked his ammunition before answering. "There are some troubles worth having, Miss Walker." He met her gaze. "And some principles worth defending." As they continued north, Prudence found herself studying Hadley with new eyes. There was a depth to him she hadn't expected, a quiet strength that reminded her of her father. By midday, they reached a swift-flowing creek and followed it upstream, using the water to hide their tracks. "Tell me about Chicago," Hadley said as they rode side by side through a narrow canyon. "What made you take a job with Caldwell?" Prudence smiled ruefully. "After my father died, I needed work. I was educated unusual for a woman in my circumstances, and Caldwell paid well for someone who could keep books and write his correspondence." She sighed. "At first, I thought I was fortunate. And then you discovered what kind of man he really was," Hadley finished for her. Prudence nodded. "He was always improper with the female staff. But when I began to notice discrepancies in the ledgers, he became threatening." "So you decided to steal evidence and run," Hadley surmised. "Not exactly," Prudence admitted. "I was going to report him to the board of directors. But then I overheard him talking about a surveyor who'd disappeared after asking too many questions. That's when I realized how dangerous he truly was." They reached the trapper's cabin as the sun was beginning to set. It was smaller than Hadley's home, little more than a one-room shelter with a stone fireplace, but it was well concealed in a stand of tall pines. "We should be safe here for the night," Hadley said, dismounting and helping Prudence down. Their hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary, and Prudence felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the exertion of their journey. Inside the cabin, Hadley built a small fire, careful to keep it low so the smoke wouldn't be visible from a distance. They ate a simple meal of jerky and dried apples from Hadley's supplies. "How long have you lived out here alone?" Prudence asked as they sat by the fire. 7 years, Hadley replied. "After the war, I tried working as a doctor in St. Louis, but..." He trailed off, his eyes distant. "Too many memories. Too many ghosts." "So you came west to forget?" Hadley smiled faintly. "To remember who I was before. My father was a rancher in Texas. I grew up on horseback under open skies." He poked at the fire. "Medicine was my mother's dream for me, and it served me well during the war, but afterward." "You needed peace," Prudence finished. "Something like that." Hadley looked up at her. "What about you? What were your dreams before Caldwell?" Prudence hadn't thought about her dreams in so long that the question caught her off guard. "I wanted to teach," she said finally. "My father was a schoolteacher. He believed education could change the world." "A noble calling," Hadley observed. "Not very practical for a woman alone," Prudence countered. "Most schools won't hire unmarried women, and those that do pay barely enough to survive." "Is that why you never married?" Hadley asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Forgive me, that's not my business." Prudence smiled. "No, it's all right. The truth is, I never met anyone who saw me as more than a pretty face or a potential housekeeper. My father raised me to believe I was capable of more. He sounds like a wise man. He was. Prudence agreed, her voice soft with memory. What about you? Why no Mrs. Reeves? Hadley's expression grew somber. There was someone once. Before the war. He stared into the flames. She couldn't understand the man who came back. Can't say I blame her. They fell silent then, each lost in their own thoughts as the fire burned low. When it was time to sleep, Hadley insisted that Prudence take the narrow cot while he spread his bedroll on the floor. In the deep of the night, Prudence awoke to the sound of Hadley moving restlessly in his sleep, muttering words she couldn't make out. Without thinking, she slipped from the cot and knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Hadley," she whispered, "you're dreaming." He woke with a start, his hand automatically reaching for his gun before he recognized her. "Prudence," he breathed, the use of her first name seemingly unconscious. "The war?" she asked quietly. He nodded, sitting up and running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Always the same. The field hospital at Antietam. So many boys dying, and not enough hands to help them." Prudence sat beside him, their shoulders touching in the darkness. "My father used to say that the hardest memories are often carried by the most tender hearts." Hadley looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing something new in her face. "Your father was right about many things, it seems." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, a possibility. Prudence felt her heart quicken as Hadley's hand found hers in the darkness. "We should try to sleep," he said finally, though his hand didn't move from hers. "Tomorrow will be a long day." But sleep was slow in coming for both of them, their thoughts filled with new and unexpected feelings blooming in the midst of danger. Morning brought a heavy mist that clung to the trees and obscured the distant mountains. Hadley studied the sky with concern. "Storm coming," he predicted as they ate a hasty breakfast. "We need to reach Sawyer's Pass before it hits, or we'll be stranded on the wrong side of the mountain." They rode hard through the morning, following game trails and old Indian paths that Hadley seemed to know by instinct. By midday, dark clouds were building on the horizon, and thunder rumbled in the distance. "There," Hadley pointed to a narrow cleft in the mountainside ahead. "That's Sawyer's Pass. Once we're through, we'll be in Bridger Valley. From there, it's a straight shot to Cheyenne." They had just started the ascent to the pass when the crack of a rifle shot echoed off the canyon walls. Prudence's horse reared in panic, and she struggled to keep her seat as another shot ricocheted off the rocks near Hadley's head. "Ambush!" Hadley shouted, drawing his revolver and firing toward a ridge where he'd spotted movement. "Ride for the pass. I'll cover you. I'm not leaving you," Prudence protested, bringing the Winchester to her shoulder and firing at their unseen attackers. A bullet grazed Hadley's horse, causing the animal to stumble. Hadley dismounted quickly, slapping the horse's flank to send it running for cover. "Now we have no choice," he grimaced, climbing up behind Prudence on her mare. "Go!" Prudence urged her horse forward, feeling Hadley's arms tighten around her waist as they galloped for the pass. Behind them, at least 3 riders had emerged from cover and were in pursuit. The storm broke just as they reached the narrow passage, rain coming down in blinding sheets. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the treacherous path ahead. Prudence's mare picked her way carefully along the rocky trail, while behind them, their pursuers were gaining ground. "There's a cave about halfway through the pass," Hadley shouted over the storm. "If we can reach it, we might be able to hold them off." They spotted the cave entrance just as another bolt of lightning split the sky. Prudence guided her exhausted horse toward it, nearly collapsing with relief when they were finally out of the rain. The cave was deeper than it appeared from outside, extending back into darkness. Hadley quickly secured the horse while Prudence took up a position near the entrance, the Winchester ready. "They'll have to come at us one at a time through that opening," Hadley said, joining her with his revolver drawn. "That gives us the advantage." They didn't have to wait long. Through the curtain of rain, they could make out 3 figures approaching cautiously. Jackson was in the lead, his face twisted with fury as he spotted them in the cave. "Nowhere left to run," he called out. "Give us the woman and the documents, and maybe you get to live, Cowboy." "You know my answer to that," Hadley replied, his voice carrying despite the storm. Jackson signaled to his men, who spread out, seeking cover among the rocks outside the cave. For the next hour, an intermittent exchange of gunfire punctuated the sound of the raging storm. Neither side could gain an advantage. Hadley and Prudence were well protected in the cave, but they were also effectively trapped. As darkness began to fall, Prudence noticed Hadley checking their ammunition with increasing concern. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly. "6 shots left in the Winchester, 7 in my Colt," he replied grimly. "Not enough if they decide to rush us." Prudence swallowed hard. "I won't let them take me alive, Hadley. What Caldwell does to women who cross him." She couldn't finish the thought. Hadley's expression darkened, and he placed a hand on hers. "It won't come to that, I promise you." In the fading light, his eyes held such intensity that Prudence felt her breath catch. There was something unspoken passing between them, something that had been building since the moment she'd ridden into his life. "Why are you really doing this?" she whispered. "Risking everything for a stranger?" Hadley was silent for a long moment. "Because the moment I saw you, I knew." "Knew what?" "That you were worth fighting for." His voice was rough with emotion. "That some things some people come along once in a lifetime." Before Prudence could respond, a shout from outside drew their attention. A new voice was calling out, authoritative and commanding. "United States Marshal, throw down your weapons." Confusion reigned as lanterns illuminated the area outside the cave. Through the rain, they could see several mounted men in dusters, badges glinting on their chests. Jackson and his men were being disarmed and restrained. A tall figure approached the cave entrance, holding up a lantern. "Anyone alive in there? Marshal Davis?" Hadley called incredulously. "How in blazes?" The marshal stepped into the cave, water streaming from his hat. "Hadley Reeves. Thought that might be you." His eyes moved to Prudence. "And you must be Miss Walker." Prudence stared in shock. "How do you know my name?" Marshal Davis smiled grimly. "Got a telegram from the U.S. Attorney in Chicago 3 days ago. Seems a brave young woman sent him some very interesting documents before fleeing west." He nodded to the saddlebags where Prudence kept the stolen map. "Those would be the originals, I presume?" "Yes," Prudence confirmed, still trying to process what was happening. "But how did you find us?" "Been tracking Caldwell's men for days," the marshal explained. "When we heard shooting up at the pass, wasn't hard to figure out who they were after." He glanced at Hadley. "Lucky for you two, we've been building a case against Caldwell for months. Miss Walker's evidence was the final piece we needed." Relief washed over Prudence like a physical force, and she found herself leaning against Hadley for support. His arm went around her shoulders naturally, steadying her. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe now." The following weeks were a whirlwind of depositions and testimony. Victor Caldwell and several territorial officials were arrested on charges of fraud, bribery, and in Caldwell's case, murder. Prudence's evidence proved crucial in securing indictments. Throughout it all, Hadley remained by her side, a steady presence as she navigated the intimidating legal proceedings in Cheyenne. When she testified before the grand jury, he waited outside the courthouse, pacing until she emerged. You were magnificent, he told her afterward, his pride evident in his smile. Your father would have been proud. On their last night in Cheyenne, with the legal proceedings finally concluded, they walked together through the quiet streets. Spring had arrived in earnest, bringing with it the scent of new growth and possibility. What will you do now? Hadley asked as they paused on a bridge overlooking a creek swollen with melted snow. Prudence had been pondering this question for days. The U.S. attorney offered me a position as a clerk in his office, she said. It's good work, important work. In Chicago, Hadley noted, his voice carefully neutral. Yes, Prudence turned to face him. And you'll return to your valley, rebuild your cabin. Hadley looked out over the rushing water. That was the plan. The unspoken hung between them, heavy with implications. Prudence gathered her courage. Unless, she began. Hadley's eyes met hers, hope kindling in their depths. Unless there's a reason for me to stay in Wyoming territory, Prudence said softly. A compelling reason. Hadley moved closer, his hand finding hers. I can think of several. I'd need to hear them, Prudence challenged, her heart racing. Well, Hadley began, his voice husky. There's the matter of rebuilding my cabin. Could use someone with an eye for design. Prudence smiled. Is that all? Then there's the school in Cottonwood Creek, he continued. Heard they're looking for a teacher. Someone educated, with principles. More compelling, Prudence acknowledged. What else? Hadley's free hand came up to cup her cheek. And then there's the most important reason of all. Which is, I love you, Prudence Walker, he said simply. Have since you rode into my life and turned it upside down. And if you'll have me, I'd like to spend the rest of my days proving that to you. Tears welled in Prudence's eyes. When I told you they would hunt me, I said let them meet me first, Hadley finished. And I meant it. I'll always stand between you and danger, for as long as I live. In that case, Prudence whispered, moving closer, I think Wyoming territory has gained a new resident. Their first kiss was everything she had imagined, tender yet passionate, a promise of all that was to come. When they finally parted, Hadley kept her close, unwilling to let even an inch separate them. I should warn you, he said, a smile playing at his lips. Life with me won't always be comfortable. I'm stubborn, set in my ways. Prudence laughed. And I'm opinionated and headstrong. We'll make quite the pair. That we will, Hadley agreed, kissing her again. That we will. 3 months later, they stood hand in hand on the porch of their rebuilt cabin. It was larger than before, with a proper bedroom and a small attached room that would serve as Prudence's classroom until the town finished building the schoolhouse. Marshall Davis had been their first visitor, bringing news that Victor Caldwell had been sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison. The railroad land had been returned to the territory for proper settlement, and the families of those who had been killed received compensation. Justice doesn't always prevail, the marshal had told them. But when it does, it's because of people like you too. Now, as the summer sun set over their valley, Prudence leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in a way she had never thought possible. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Getting involved in my troubles? Hadley turned to her, his eyes filled with the love that had only grown stronger with each passing day. Best decision I ever made, he assured her, placing a gentle hand on her still flat abdomen where their first child was just beginning to grow. And I'd make it again in a heartbeat. Prudence smiled up at the man who had risked everything for a stranger, who had become her protector, her partner, and her love. Then let them come, she whispered, echoing his words from their first meeting. Let them all come. We'll face whatever comes next together. Together, Hadley agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss as the first stars appeared in the Wyoming sky. bearing witness to a love born in danger but destined to thrive in peace.